Welcome to Focus on the Five, conversations with Baldwin County business leaders and entrepreneurs, brought to you by Josh Knoll of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. And now, Josh Knoll.
Hi everyone, welcome to Focus on the Five, conversations with Baldwin County, Alabama area entrepreneurs and business leaders. I'm your host, Josh Knoll of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. We are coming to you today from the studios of WABF 1480 AM, located in beautiful downtown Fairhope, Alabama. My guest today is a local attorney that has spent 7 years in general practice before starting his own firm to focus on a couple of very important issues that affect families everywhere. Today we're going to dive into his specialties as well as get to know him a little bit better personally. But before we do all that, let's give a big welcome to our guest today, Mr. Asheton Sawyer of Sawyer Legal Services. That's our clap track, in case you didn't know.
All right,
Asheton, before we dig into your independent firm's focus, I want to talk about how you got here.
Sure.
So, everybody likes to have the origin story. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from right here in Fairhope, Alabama.
All right. Native son.
That's right.
Okay.
At least that's what I claim. Now, there's a disclaimer involved there. I moved around a lot as a kid.
Okay.
My father, who's a minister at First Baptist Church here in Fairhope, and my mother were actually career missionaries for a period of time. And so I'm from here. All my family's from here. But we did spend some time overseas, and then I moved back here right before I started high school.
Okay.
So
did you spend all of high school here then?
I did. I moved back here the summer or spring before ninth grade and went to Fairhope High School for all 4 years.
Very good. Now you're not old, but you're old enough to have seen quite a bit of change around here.
Definitely.
A little different than when you went to high school and all that?
It is. I mean, there are certain things that are still Fairhope, and what
Right. makes
makes Fairhope, but it's a little busier.
Right.
A few more people, but that's not a bad thing.
Right. As long as they can figure out where to put everybody.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the great things that Fairhope has managed over the years. That is to be able to manage the growth and still kind of maintain that quintessential essence of what Fairhope has always been.
Right.
So it's not an easy thing.
No, it's a hard balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're as popular around here as the areas become.
And it seems like people are still beating down the door to get here. So.
Right. Well, all right. So graduated high school, then went to college.
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Where'd you go?
I was fortunate enough to get an appointment to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. So I went and spent 4 years there, and then as part of that, I incurred a commitment to serve in the Navy.
Okay.
Ended up serving on active duty for about 10 years.
Very good.
As a naval aviator, and then from there, just decided, the last couple of years I was stationed in Pensacola as a flight instructor, was back home close to family. I married Megan Ford Sawyer from here. Who has an enormous family here.
For those not from around here, Ford, there's a lot of them.
There are, yes. So we still had connections here, and being stationed about an hour away over in Pensacola, just started toying with the thought of, where do we want to raise our kids, and would we like to be in Fairhope, and so I decided to get out of the military at that time, and ended up going back to law school.
So, all right. So, when you got out of the military, had there been a long plan in place to go into law school, or how did you end up heading that direction?
It was one of those things that I kind of chose between these two paths. Leaving high school, it's kind of two things that I was interested in: aviation and law. Somehow, my life worked out where I kind of had the opportunity to do both things.
Right.
So that was my initial thought. I mean, I explored other options. I knew that, it might not be the easiest path, jumping out of a pretty secure job and going back to school full time. Megan went back to work full time as well. For that 3-year period that we were in school, and that's kind of just what we said. Let's give it a shot, and see where it takes us. So it wasn't a plan to get out the whole time. It's just when the opportunity came, that's what we chose to do.
Very good. All right, so go to law school. Where'd you go to law school?
I went to the University of Florida.
Okay, very good.
Yep,
right.
in Gainesville.
So you went to University of Florida. When you graduated, did you immediately jump into a practice? And if you did, what kind of practice?
We initially moved back home, which was one of the things that we intended on doing.
Right.
It was really tough during that time. when economy kind of collapsed in 2008, that was when I was going into school. That had kind of a 2 to 3 year ripple effect on the legal services industry.
Right.
And it was really hard to find a job. So we looked around the Southeast and we said, look, we've always wanted to go home. There weren't really a whole lot of opportunities. I said, well, we're just going to make our opportunities. So we decided to come home. I went into solo practice, took the bar exam.
Oh, right out of the chute.
Went into solo practice right out of the chute. Don't necessarily advise that, but it's, if you're hard-headed enough, sometimes it works out. Now, for me, it was difficult for the first, few months to a year or so, getting some traction. I had the luxury of my connection to the Navy. I was not in the reserves when I got out. I got back to Fairhope and ultimately applied and was accepted back into the Navy Reserve, and I was kind of working part-time as a flight instructor at Pensacola, which was the last job I'd had on active duty. So I had that to kind of provide a little bit of financial support while I attempted to build a practice.
Right.
Now, that's a double-edged sword because about a year in, I got a letter saying, congratulations, Mr. Reservist, you're being recalled to active duty for a year.
Oh, gosh.
And you have about 90 days to get prepared for that. So that's kind of how my first year or two of practice went. It was a scramble to kind of close matters down and address them and get them, get other attorneys to maybe assist closing things out that I, knew I was not going to have the time to do. I ended up going back in the military for a year plus a couple months. It was after that experience that I realized, look, I don't think I'm going to start from scratch again. Right. I'm going to go with somebody that's got kind of established practice and work with them, and in case it happens again.
Well, did you know when you got called back into active duty that you were going to be there for a year and a half?
I knew that it would be a year.
Okay.
It ended up being a little more than a year, but I knew it would be around a year. That's what the orders were for. So I knew it was temporary.
You went into general practice then for a larger firm.
Yes.
Okay.
I practiced here in town with a gentleman who's practiced in Fairhope for almost 40 years.
Okay.
A wonderful man and just a great attorney. And was there, basically from that time until earlier this year.
Yeah, and so you're there a total of about 7 years.
Well, not with him for 7 years. Him just a little under 5 years.
Okay,
So that first 2 years was me by myself, and then me technically being a lawyer, but being in the Navy. So.
Well, when you were over those those years, were you doing general practice type stuff? What were you doing?
Yeah, it was always general. Everything from civil litigation, representing individuals, representing businesses, domestic work. Whether on the front side it would be at divorce, custody matters, child support, collection, things like that. Estate planning, some real estate transactions, really almost anything you can think of, with the exception of, bankruptcy, which I've never touched,
okay.
And niche stuff, kind of like intellectual property type things.
Kind of jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades,
yeah,
yes.
five-tool player
Yep, trying to be.
Right.
That's kind of the model that we were practicing under, and it works. It's great to get. It was one of the best things for me as a lawyer to get such a broad exposure, and I think a lot of that exposure informs what I'm trying to do right now, just because I just have such a broad base of experience.
Right.
Not necessarily deep experience, but if you bring up some kind of legal issue to me, I've probably done something closely I've touched it somehow, and I know something about it.
Well, with that experience, I know from talking to you in the past that there were certain things issues that kept kind of coming up again and again and again.
Yes, there's I always hope to be an estate planner, asset protection type practitioner. And so I didn't pay particular attention or care to estate planning or probate cases more than others. I mean, those tend to stick in my mind, and I just continue to notice a trend in a lot of cases where people had quote unquote done the right thing. They had an estate plan in place. That's half the battle, is getting people to get something in place. Whether it's just a basic will,
anything,
right? A power of attorney,
right.
Healthcare directives, living wills. Those four things right there, I consider that's your starting point. You need, I, as an attorney, and particularly as an estate planning attorney, believe that everybody should have those. It would take an hour and a half for us to talk through all the problems that could arise by not having them, and I think that's beyond the scope of this show. But the point is, most of these cases that I kept seeing were in our office because someone had gone out and gotten an estate plan done.
Okay.
Yet there was still some kind of problem.
Okay.
An example would be, a child comes in and says, my father passed away. Here's his will. It doesn't provide for my stepmother. They were married after the will, and he never updated it.
Right.
I don't think he wanted to give her anything. Well, that's problematic because guess what? In Alabama, she's entitled to something. Right. And so you have that case. You have cases where, I said most of them dealt with those estate plans that were in place. A good example of another case would be where, 22-year-old young man was hired by a national tech company, right out of college. He's a smart guy, going to go places, so excited about it, moves out there, gets himself set up. I remember back to when I first filled out my first employee benefits stuff at that age, about 22. I had some life insurance.
Right, because I think I was supposed to.
Right, and I had some, that was part of one of my benefits, and who do you name, Well, I wasn't married, I obviously love my parents, but I've got a brother, let's kick him some, let's kick my sister,
Right.
It wasn't a joke, I took it seriously, but I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
That happened in this case. We had this young man named his younger brother as sole beneficiary of this large life insurance policy, because nothing was going to happen to him. He was 22 years old.
Right.
Within 6 months, he had a very unfortunate accident, passed away.
Right.
It took almost 9 months to get the payout on that life insurance policy because it was left to a minor.
Uh-huh.
And essentially had to go to court to get a proper structure in place before the life insurance company would pay that benefit. So that's another example of, just people don't, we tend not to want to think about these things.
Right.
Because, generally we're addressing or acknowledging our own mortality.
Right.
But the way I like to think about it is that we're also, while we're living, I like to make a distinction between what I call horizontal planning and vertical planning. Vertical planning being what you want to do while you're vertical,
right,
and not having to come in and salvage something while you're horizontal, or have your family, try to have to fix something when you're horizontal.
Right, pick up the pieces.
Absolutely. So I guess back to this, as your question is, I repeatedly saw, these situations, and the first 2 or 3 times you think, man, this is one of those outliers. This is a law school question. But it happened enough where I just started thinking, man, this
might be the norm.
This tends to be the norm.
Right.
And I started thinking, well, particularly with these people that had plans in place, what's going on here?
Right.
And this is my opinion. I thought, well, again, I don't want to discourage anybody from going out and getting a plan, because, like we say, that's half the battle. Get something in place. It is better than nothing. Financially, from a time, the time that it takes to address things after you've passed, the anguish that it gives your family, by all means, get something in place.
Right.
But if you have the opportunity, you want to have something more than just a bunch of documents.
Right.
And that's kind of where when I thought about this, I said, what's happening is people are going out, they're not planning, they're buying documents. And I like to make a distinction between documents and planning. Because let me tell you a secret, Josh. There's always a plan in place.
Right.
It might be your plan, or it might be somebody else's
It might
plan.
be no plan.
That whatever that commercial, there's an app for that. Well, there's a plan for that in estate planning.
Right.
You can do nothing, but there's a plan in place.
Right.
Something's going to be done with your stuff. If you're not deceased, if you're merely incompetent, whether temporarily or permanently, there's a plan for you.
Right.
Wouldn't you rather it be your plan?
Then you get into the scariest phrase in the English language, which is, I'm with the government and I'm here to help.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, on that note, let's take a quick break for station identification. For those of you just joining us here on WABF 1480, this is Focus on the Five, Conversations with Baldwin County, Alabama entrepreneurs and business leaders. I'm your host, Josh Knoll, and I'm joined today by Mr. Asheton Sawyer of Sawyer Legal Services. All right, so Asheton, you make the decision to go out on your own.
Yes.
You decided that you've been the five-tool utility player, you've been the jack of all trades. You're going to address some of the things that you see coming up and over and over again. What areas did you decide to base your independent practice on?
Well, as I've said before, I've always been passionate about the estate, trust, probate world, and having seen that maybe there's a need in this community to approach things in a different way. I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to crack this nut from a different angle. And so my practice focuses primarily on estate planning, asset protection. I see those two things as intertwined and almost indistinguishable. And then, elder law issues such as, Medicaid qualification, Medicaid benefits, VA type benefits, and of course, as kind of a sub-umbrella of the asset protection, basic business services as far as, establishing LLCs or corporations, startups, things like that.
On the elder law, I wanted to ask you, what's kind of an issue that you see, especially with the baby boomers, starting to age out a little bit?
Right.
What's a common theme you see with elder law, elder care, long-term care things? What's some pops up?
Long-term care is an enormous issue in our society. Right. The numbers of us that are living longer, you hear the quote-unquote outliving my savings,
right.
Outliving my retirement plan. Medicine has made such significant advances that a lot of us are getting to the more and more of us are living to the age where our bodies are still going, but we need substantial assistance
right.
with our activities of daily living. One of the big trends I see there, people are afraid that all of their stuff, and I like to use the word stuff,
it is.
Their estate, their assets, things that they've earned over their life, they're afraid that they're going to lose it all. And they don't necessarily want to keep it for themselves, but they want to leave something behind for their kids or
right.
for their wife or for a charity.
Right.
And a lot of times you'll see people trying to do things. They're so afraid that, look, I know that sometime in the near future there's a good likelihood I'm going to go into a long-term care facility. I don't want to lose my home. I don't want to lose my bank account. I want to leave something to, I want to leave some kind of legacy.
Right.
So with that in mind, a lot of times I see people, they come in and they say, look, I want to go ahead and give my house to my kids.
Okay.
Or, I want to go ahead and put my child on this bank account and take my name off,
right. So what's the problem with that?
The problem with that is that, number one, if they're thinking about doing it specifically to avoid losing those assets to Medicaid, well, they may or may not be successful. It depends on when they go into
right.
a facility.
Right. If they know the date that they're going to need the assistance.
Absolutely.
Right.
But nobody knows the
Nobody
date.
knows that.
And if that date is too soon,
right. Big nasty word called look back.
A look back period, that's right. And they could penalize themselves. In other words, they could qualify for Medicaid benefits that will pay for their long-term care, but they qualify subject to a penalty period that has no cap.
Right.
It is indefinite.
Right.
And if you give away sufficient assets, you could essentially make yourself indefinitely ineligible.
Right.
Although you're qualified medically and otherwise.
And then you get into the second nasty word of spin down.
Spin down, yeah.
Yep.
And I'll give you just another example about that, Josh. Another side reason why it's not good is the liability exposure. People say, well, I just want to put my child on my bank account as a convenience. Well, there's a way to do that.
Okay.
You don't want to make them a joint owner.
Right.
Because then that child, with no ill intent, goes out, maybe texts while they drive and run a stop sign and hit a bus full of school kids.
Right.
Well, when that lawsuit comes down and that judgment's entered and it's time to collect, guess what's part of that child's
That joint account.
Yep. Or that house.
Right.
So
it all plans.
there's some tax reasons too, and I don't want to get into those.
Sure.
I think that's beyond the scope, but there are a lot of issues there.
Well, I think, you're really, to me, when you sent me your summary, I think you really hit the nail on the head of just you need to get with someone with competent help when it comes to those planning things, and you need to give it somebody that's got your best interests in mind.
Right.
Right. And sometimes, hey, a lot of times people get, my grandma, grandpa got through their life on their own, but things totally changed in the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, things can really change, especially when kids are involved.
Absolutely.
Right. Also on that note, what do I could do a whole day on misconceptions about financial planners, but this is your show and this is about attorneys. What do you think are some misconceptions about estate planning and an attorney's relationship with that?
I think we hit on it a little bit earlier when I said that people think that estate planning is about what happens when you die.
Right.
I think that's an enormous misconception. Dying's only part of it. Living's a large part of it. In my definition of estate planning, I would say that planning for incompetency is a large part of that.
Right.
While you're alive. Planning for what I like to call those creditors and predators that are out there, those unforeseen traps that some of us fall into. There are ways to structure your assets in order to maintain virtually full use and control of them and benefit from them. But when when that car wreck happens or that unforeseen, accident that you're in, that now there's a judgment creditor knocking on the door, maybe you've got a portion of your assets tucked away and protected.
Right.
So it's a lot of it's about the living, and second of all, it's not about you. It's about the legacy you leave and the gift that you give to your children. And I don't mean the monetary gift or the financial gift or that as much as I mean having your stuff in order, having your affairs squared away. It's already going to be painful when you go, or when all of us go. Right. Hopefully we all have somebody close enough that, I think you've lived a good life if one person's sad when you leave.
Right, that's right. I like that.
But the gift that you can give is to minimize, the effect that it has on those you leave behind during that transition period.
Right. That's very well said. I think it's fair to say about my business as well. But one of the misconceptions is that it's expensive.
Right.
To even start the conversation.
That's right. Obviously, we are all in business to make money. That's the only way we can stay in business and do. For those of us who have kind of struck out and done things like this, we're doing what we love. Mm-hmm. If you can't live off of it, you can't keep doing it.
That's right.
So, with that being said, though, my whole life I've just been exposed to the concept of service. With my parents and the service that they've always rendered. My mom's a teacher. My father's a minister and missionary and all that. I did some time in the military. I felt it was very important to me to give back to my country, and I've gotten overwhelmingly more benefit out of that experience than I feel like I ever gave.
Right.
And I think this is one thing that led me into law is, I think that, lawyers are public servants or should be.
Right.
This will kind of dovetail back into my kind of unique approach. I want people to know what questions to ask. I want people to know whether what they have in place from an estate plan standpoint is going to get them where they want to be.
Right.
To that end, I offer a about every 2 weeks a public workshop.
That's great. I was hoping you would mention that.
Yeah,
So
and
let's talk
and
about
it's-
that workshop.
Sure, it's free. It's a free public workshop. It's about 2 hours.
All right.
I try to keep it a little under that, but it is. I think it's fun. It's interactive, and it basically covers the full spectrum of, my definition of what estate planning is. We start out talking about powers of attorney, guardianships, conservatorships. What happens if something happens to you while you're alive and somebody needs to make decisions for you.
Right.
And we use that as a launching pad, and we walk through, the whole probate process. We talk about ways to avoid probate. We talk about asset protection, exposure to creditors, exposure to what I call the predators. I don't mean that in a bad way, but things like long-term care. We do a little bit of tax talk, not a whole lot. That's a little bit more advanced, and then basically wrap up with kind of an overview of different types of trusts and how they can be utilized as tools, not as ends to themselves, but it or simply means to get each individual person where they want to be with their plan.
Well, and get people comfortable with asking the questions.
That's right.
Yeah, because you and I both know there's a lot of times we've sat through things in our industry, and I'm like, well, I feel like I should know that,
Right.
but I don't really want to ask the question.
Absolutely.
Well, take the average person who doesn't do what we do on a daily basis, and
Right.
and a lot of times it's a good question. They're just not comfortable asking it.
And back to the purpose of it, it's not a sales pitch. It's not I don't like to use the term seminar.
Right.
Nothing wrong with anybody that does,
Sure.
but it truly is an interactive workshop. It's not so that it's not designed to give people the answers when they walk out the door.
Right.
It's to give
Well,
them.
because you can't give all the answers to all the people anyway.
That's
Every
right.
situation is different.
That's absolutely right, and
Right.
that's one of my core principal beliefs
Right.
regarding estate planning. There's no such thing as a one-size-fit-all
Amen.
plan.
That's what drives me nuts in my business.
Absolutely.
These guys do these seminars, and they've got
know-
the one greatest product to end all financial ills.
That's right.
Yeah.
Every single situation is different to some degree.
Well, I couldn't agree more. All right, so let's go. Let's get through. Where's the workshop at? How does somebody get signed up for it?
We have been holding them, and will continue for the next couple of months to hold them here at the Hampton Inn in Fairhope.
Okay.
They start at 6. We get started right on the dot, so that we're not there too long, and usually wrap up a little bit before 8 o'clock. There's a little
Okay.
break in the middle, so it's not it's not a boring lecture. Like I said, it's interactive, and it is.
Where do you advertise them? How do people find out?
Oh yeah, it's they can sign up for my workshop either by going to my website.
Okay, go ahead. List that website.
It's SawyerLegalServices.com.
Okay.
They can call the office. My number's 251-929-4750, or they can shoot me an email at aws@SawyerLegalServices.com.
All right, and that's Sawyer, S-A-W.
SAWYER.
Yep. And give
Legal
your number one more
Services.
time.
It's 251-929-4750.
Okay, because I think that you'll definitely have some listeners interested in that, and I would think at your workshop you probably have a couple generations coming together. Do you see
We
that?
do,
Okay.
and we have older people, new families, sometimes young single people. All of those people require different types of planning.
That's right.
Because they're at different stages in their life.
Well, all right. So on that note, as we start to wrap up, do you have anything else you'd like to add along
Well,
that line?
if anybody's interested in the workshop, the next one will be May 23rd, and then June 6th, and then there's the rest of the dates are on the website.
All right, and we'll put that with this video post as well. So May 23rd at the Hampton Inn
That's correct.
here in downtown Fairhope.
Yes.
Okay, and from 6 to 8. Do they have to pre-register? Or do they show
We do
up?
ask that they pre-register, just because we try to cap it. We like to have a little bit of an intimate working group.
Right.
So we have about 16 seats. I like to try to cap it at about 14 people if I can.
Perfect.
Just because I don't like it to be a lecture. It needs to be. It's a give and
Needs
take.
to be
It's a talk.
interactive.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. You and I have got up there and talked to enough people before.
Right.
It's more fun when it's a two-way conversation. So, all right. Well, that's fantastic information. I think we definitely want to help you get the word out on that. And then if you're a regular listener of the show, you know that we also film this conversation and release it across multiple social media platforms. So if you're watching this video and you'd like to reach out to either Asheton or myself, feel free to send us a message. You get messages, Facebook, and
I do.
social media.
And
okay.
there's a Sawyer Legal Services Facebook page as well that you can check on.
Perfect. Okay. Lastly, if you're a Baldwin County area entrepreneur or business person, would like to have a conversation like this one, reach out to me. You'll find my contact info at the end of this show in my disclosure. And for the first time ever, your disclosure is going to be mixed in there. So
right.
We got two disclosures going, or yours will be before mine. Wanted to thank my guest today, Mr. Asheton Sawyer of Sawyer Legal Services. You did a fantastic job.
Well,
I wish we had more time, Lori. I'm not gonna lie. This was some good stuff. As well as all of you out there listening, I am Josh Knoll of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. This has been Focus on the Five. Thank you all and have a great day. Good job, buddy.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you for listening to Focus on the Five. If you are interested in learning more about Josh Knoll and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, you can find us at gulfcoastfa.com, call 251-327-2124, email josh.knoll@gulfcoastfa.com, or message us on Facebook. Focus on the Five is produced by Josh Knoll of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. Advisory services offered through Investment Advisors, a division of Pro Equities Inc., a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Pro Equities Inc., a registered broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is independent of Pro Equities Inc. Information presented is for educational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Focus on the Five offers commentary and generalized research, not personalized investment advice. Show content is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a complete description of our investment services or performance. All investments involve risk and unless otherwise stated are not guaranteed. Be sure to consult a tax professional before implementing any investment strategy.